I look at leadership as a skill set. It's a tool, if you will, but a tool that I have a duty, obligation, responsibility to continue to develop and use for the good. But also being a tool, a skill, it can be developed with time. Okay. So leadership, are skill sets that you can continue to acquire. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, I want to be a better leader for myself, for my family, you can. It's an acquired skill set.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to the From Boys to Men show, brought to you by the Squire Program. I'm your host, Lheyton Cook. Today, I have a really, really special guest with me today. A great friend of mine, someone who I've learned a lot from, that I have the pleasure of being around pretty often, and actually the CEO of Fit Body Bootcamp, my good friend Bryce Henson. How you doing, man?
My man, L, doing fantastic. Thanks so much for having me on.
Good. I'm glad to have you on, man. Thanks for coming on. This is going to be awesome for multiple reasons. I want to talk to you about mentorship. I want to talk to you about your upbringing. I want to talk to you about everything when it comes to how you've become the man you are today. You've accomplished a lot of great things. And so I want to touch on all of it. It's going to be a great value to everybody. So I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Pleasure is mine, and just excited to connect with you today, my friend.
Awesome. I appreciate it. So the first thing, man, we always talk about, I like starting with the foundation of where your childhood, began. Like kind of that's obviously a lot of things that happen to us when we're children kind of carry on with us in positive or negative ways as we grow up. And so I'm just kind of curious on what your childhood was like when it comes to your parents, and then obviously a little bit about, your father specifically being the Squire Program. Like, can you tell us about your upbringing a little bit?
I can, and I love that question. I appreciate you asking it, because normally I'm usually talking about fitness and business and, running an international franchise, which I'm sure there's probably some, value to talk about, but very rarely do I get a chance to talk about like the early years, if you will, which are so developmental and formative for everyone. So for me, to answer your direct question, my first 10 years or so were very volatile, and it wasn't because of my mother. My mother's a sweet lady, salt of the earth, grew up in Detroit, Michigan, come from a lower class, blue collar family, but really good, hardworking family. And that was her vision for her life, to have, 3 kids and, be a housewife and just, be a very productive citizen society by pouring into her kids. Unfortunately, she just picked the wrong guy in terms of a good father figure, if you will. But certainly I'm grateful and for my life and my siblings. But my father was a drug addict, addicted to alcohol and gambling, which is the trifecta, not necessarily conducive for a good family upbringing. So the first 10 years were riddled with challenge and frustration and arguments. And I remember being a little boy, 7, 8 years old, just being frustrated, confused on why my parents were arguing so much. And there was a common pattern, if you will, which I learned later on, which my dad would go on a bender. He would come back, usually lose thousands of dollars of money we didn't have, come back in a drunken state. And as you would imagine, that caused a lot of chaos and volatility. So that was kind of the framework on, how my first 10 years of life came about.
How involved was your, like, when you were thinking about those first 10 years, how involved was your father, as far as, like, we're basically, what I'm trying to get at is, like, in my situation, it was just me and my mom in the house. Like, literally that was it. There was I didn't see my mom and dad arguing, because by the time I was even like, he got arrested when I was 10 months old.
Right.
So by the time I actually had a mind to think for myself and see what's going on around me, he was already gone. So I only had just her, so I didn't see any arguments as far as that goes. But you had your dad in the house. They weren't getting along. There was some friction there. Did you kind of just disconnect from him and just kind of gravitate towards mom? Was there any kind of good memories? Like, kind of, what was your relationship like with him?
It's a great question. And there's a little dichotomy to it, because generally speaking, when I look at the relationship, I looked at friction and arguments and confusion, if you will. So I knew I didn't like them together. I didn't really understand the root reason at the time. And a lot of the times my dad would leave a lot. So it was actually very hit or miss. A lot of it was missed. So he was out of the house, etc. Ironically, why it created so much confusion, though, when he'd come back, he'd sober up, try to get on the straight and narrow a little bit. And for some times, I actually have, a solid 10 or so memories, being younger, and actually very positive memories, like him trying to play catch with us and, focus in with me and my brother specifically. He never had a really strong connection with my sister, unfortunately. And she felt that, which I think, are some issues that she's carried with her to today, and rightfully so. For my brother and I, we looked at it from a perspective of, we really wanted our dad to be there. We, looked for that father figure, and he was a big guy. So he played sports as well. So ironically enough, the small amount of times that he was there, I actually had some fond memories, but that's also why it was so challenging when my parents escaped, or excuse me, my mom escaped, my parents split for good reason. Those following years, I felt confused because the few memories I did have were positive, and I felt that sense of abandonment, like, well, why me? There's something probably I did wrong to cause this, which is, clearly not the case. But when you're a young boy, you don't know it all.
Exactly. What do you feel like? Like, do you feel like you kind of, did you carry any of that with you in adulthood? Like, what kind of, what is life like now after going through something like that? Because it's traumatic. Like when we have different situations as far as the details goes, but as far as not having that father figure that we wanted and needed, that's very similar. We share that. And I know what I carried with me into adulthood that I'm working through and trying to get better with. But what about you? Like, do you feel like you carried any of that into adulthood that you had to kind of work through, or tell me about that?
Great question. And the answer is yes, absolutely. But the other side of the question is there's still things I'm learning that really like subconsciously I've carried with. And I've had to, through personal growth and through reflection and journaling and, seeing a therapist, which I call a mindset coach, which has been game changing, has really helped me with that process. For me, I think for the longest period of time, I felt less than. And when my father, when we split paths, if you will, and I think subconsciously, I didn't know this until I was probably my mid to late 20s, if you can believe, but I wanted to prove something to him. So really I took this attitude of like achievement. I'm going to overcompensate for the value I didn't feel I offered. I'm going to show the world how great I am by my accolades, by, doing well school, by putting myself through college, by, succeeding, moving myself to California, by becoming successful in the sales career, by becoming successful in the fitness industry, and then eventually, becoming a CEO of an international brand. I think inherently, at least initially, I was trying to prove something to my father. I couldn't have told you that 10 years ago, but generally speaking, Elle, with time, I've come to that realization. Now my motive has changed. My motive for him, because that ambition quality, it's always been factory installed.
Sure.
My reason has changed. It's really, generally speaking, to be a better version for myself, so I can impact my team, my loved ones, my family, my community, my following, if you will. So the reason has changed, but I think inherently I suffered, from that, and I wanted that chip on my shoulder grew because I wanted to prove something to my father.
For sure. Was there ever like a moment that you felt, because that is really interesting for sure. Like I think, I rarely think that we understand what's going on while it's actually happening. Like looking back in retrospect, you can understand, okay, maybe that's why I was doing that. Or actually maybe, through the working with a therapist or someone who's looking out from outside eyes and as a professional, they're like, I think you're doing this because of this, and they're able to connect the dots. But was there a moment for you that made you feel less than? Like, I'm just curious on kind of why you felt that way. You kind of explained like in the grand scheme of things, but was there like a moment or something that your dad made you feel that way and that kind of stuck with you, and that's why A, B, and C happened afterwards?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think it necessarily because of what my dad did, but I think it was the void of my dad not being there. Then it kind of played on my psyche, like there's something I could have done differently to affect the situation more in a positive route. These are just thoughts I had when I was younger. I think probably why there's a light shine upon it is because when we moved in very dramatic fashion. So as the story goes, arguments broke out, which they typically did, but this time was different. My brother and I were not in the house at the time. My sister and my mom were, and my dad, came back after, a 5-day bender, lost thousands of dollars we didn't have, came home intoxicated. And as you would imagine, my mom confronted the situation, had a conversation, which then escalated to a verbal, argument. And before you know it, things got physical. And my mom found herself on her bed being strangled by my father, gasping for air, gasping for her life. And by the grace of God, my little sister, who was a toddler at the time, kind of came walking through, and my dad, in a drunken kind of stupor, got distracted, and my mom took that opportunity, slipped his grip, and grabbing my sister, and like a bat out of hell ran out of that house, and our lives changed. For good.
And you're how old when this is happening?
I was about 8, roughly at that time.
And you were hiding, you said? Like you weren't seeing it. Like you were like...
My brother and I weren't in the house at the time, but then shortly thereafter, my mom got out of that house and then ultimately connected with us, and we went into hiding for a few days.
Got it. Okay. Got it.
But at that point, interestingly, how that story kind of turns is we went hiding for a few days. We're in a trailer park in southeast Georgia, if you were, or southeast U.S., about an hour south of Atlanta in Georgia. And we would have probably been, in a shelter, even worse, if it wasn't for my mom's family support. My mom's mom mom was my grandma, sweetest lady, looking down from us to this day. She ended up taking us in, and she was, very lower blue collar middle class as well. So there wasn't an abundance of, support there from a financial perspective, but there was a lot of love, and she was able to take us in for the better part of 10 years while my mom was getting her feet, being a secretary, having a secretary salary, supporting 3 kids. We used to run out of money before we used to run out of a month. My grandma had her room. My brother Barrett and I shared a room. And then my mom and my sister actually shared not only a room, but a bed for better part of 10 years. So that was a challenging situation from a financial perspective. But I also like to kind of take a step back. I come from humble beginnings for first world standards, which are very different than third world standards. And I didn't have that perspective in my youth. And, thankfully, because of travel, I lived in South America for a couple of years, about a decade ago. I've seen that realization. Things could have been way worse in the grand scheme of things, but didn't feel that at the time. And really the last point, El, which I'm getting to was because of that, very frustrating and challenging and anxiety-rich environment for, those 10 years while my mom was trying to get herself on her feet when we were growing up before we, kind of sprung out of the nest. So resources were very tight. Financial resources were very tight. However, my mom's brother, I had a quote unquote wealthy uncle, and unbeknownst to me at the time, he didn't provide any financial support, but he did believe in education. So we actually went to private school in that transition from the age of 8 or 9 till when I graduated high school, 17, 18 years old. So I think really to go back full circle on where the question was, well, where do you get the less than feeling after all this chaos that had ensued? And we were in an equally, shouldn't say equally challenging situation, a different challenging situation because the volatility was gone, which is a huge win. But there we were, my family, lower middle class, would have been in a shelter or worse, with my 2 siblings and I going to private school. We were clearly in a league very different than everyone else, and we could feel that. So I think there's a famous adage: comparison is a thief of joy. When you're constantly comparing yourself to other people in a very different socioeconomic class, I think probably that was also a root of why we felt less than. And then we're also, because in that particular environment, most kids to afford private school had 2 parents in the house. Not all, but I would say in that school, probably like 98%. So not only, it was a good chance, right? Because otherwise, financially, it's a big investment.
It wouldn't make sense.
It wouldn't make sense. So not only from a financial perspective, do we feel really odd, we're the family with, our dad not there. So I think shining that light was a compounding factor and compounding effect to really make me and also my siblings feel less than. Didn't actually talk a lot through it in the process, but as we're having this conversation, the last 5 years has been really big in growth for all of us. And now we're kind of starting to surface these conversations and dive a little bit deeper.
Good. And so thank you for opening up too, by the way. It's so great that people have these conversations, especially with the people, if there are other people that you're going through with, and it's like a sibling or something like that, to talk through it, not only individually, but then also have those moments with them too, where you say, well, my therapist said this, and you kind of share ideas. Like, I didn't think about it like that. And so now you're not only healing yourself individually, but you also get to connect with the people that you were going through with. And now it's like, it almost like takes you back for a second, and then you can explore that and heal from it, like truly, instead of just, I don't really think about it. It wasn't a big deal.
Which is how I attacked it for a very long time. Just kind of like sweep it under the rug. And I thought I was doing the right thing. I wasn't really in tune with my emotions, and I didn't really want to face those demons, if you will, and face the friction, if you will, to work through some of those things. But when I did, it's made all the difference. And I can actually articulate a story. I don't want to hijack the show, if you will. So we'll continue the dialogue. But there was actually a pivotal moment I'd like to share that I faced that and actually reached out to my father. But let's continue.
No, I definitely want to hear that story. One thing I do want to touch on real quick is one of the moments you had said that it's a much different situation. Like you're saying, first world trauma is a lot different than third world trauma.
Amen.
It is true, but at the same time, trauma is trauma. Like, we grew up in first world. It's not, we'd choose to be born in America. This is where we are. And so it's kind of like, it's not the same. I get it in, like, I don't know, some part of Africa, some part of Mexico, wherever else. Right. But, trauma is trauma. And when you're a kid, you don't know the difference. Right. Like, for example, B actually pointed this out to me one time on one of the interviews I did with him. And, I was basically saying that my trauma wasn't that big of a deal. So yeah, I didn't grow up with my dad because he messed up, made some mistakes, whatever. But my mom was awesome. Like my mom was like a savage. Like she always provided. Like we had always had a nice house, always had the newest things and whatever. I didn't really struggle like that. I lived a nice life. And I remember he was just like, you have for sure. But your problem is that you're always looking at a perspective as like, you're almost like belittling the things that you went through. Like those experiences were still really traumatic. Like you're just shielding it and making it seem like it wasn't that bad, which could be a great thing, because we don't want to just be woe is me and have a pity party. That's definitely not the answer. But at the same time, there were some things that affected me where, if I'm being really honest, it was really hard to get through. Now that I'm an adult and I have my own family now, it's like it's not nearly as important nowadays, because it's like I have my own family to think about. But it can be heavy. It can be a lot, man. It can be a lot. And so I am just grateful that you and I are here today to be able to talk about some of these experiences on the other side and be able to say like, okay, cool. Like if someone's listening to this and they're going through a similar thing or they've been through a similar thing, that they can also see this point as well. So I just want to say that. Dude,
man, I appreciate that. And I think I always like to say this in business and life, two things can be true. And that's really it. Number one, to have like a champion mindset, not having a victim mindset. I think that really provides a lot of value long term, and we're clearly cut from the same cloth. And there's some good qualities in that for sure. Because if it's woe is me, victim mentality, I've had the worst in the world, probably not. Like there's other people that have gone hard through more challenge than you have. However, that said, while it's important to have that mindset, to your point, in the coaching B provides you, which is equally good coaching for me as well. It's okay to lean into that pain. It's okay to lean into discomfort, because if you don't do that, what happens is you sweep it under the rug, and then it comes back to haunt you and shows up in different ways.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. But so anyways, I just had to say that, but I definitely want to hear the story of when you actually reached out to him and connected with him, because this is something I don't even know. Like I'm curious, to kind of, first of all, understand where you were in that moment, mentally and emotionally, like what made you want to do that, and then kind of what was that conversation like? Like how did that feel? Like can you kind of take us on that journey with you?
100%. I appreciate the opportunity. I think it's a good takeaway for the audience as well. And the story commenced probably when I was about 26 years old, 26, 27. Actually, no, a few years later, until the very end of my 20s. And at this point, I connected with Bedros. I just joined Fit Body Bootcamp as a franchise partner. So my business, was kind of going off in a very positive way. So things were happening. In the background, though, and I shared a little bit of my father having an addiction to alcohol. I, too, actually became an alcoholic as well. I actually think it's a genetic disposition, which is topic for another day. But regardless, it was a very humbling moment, Elle, as you would imagine, when you know that the chaos in your life that ensued between your mom and your family and your siblings primarily was rooted in addiction, and alcohol addiction is that. Right. So then to come to the realization in your late 20s, early 30s that holy smokes, I too have this type of behavior. Very humbling moment in time. So, but even at that point, though, Elle, the point of the story, which I'm going to articulate, I didn't fully come to the realization of that. I knew that I wanted to be a better man. I knew I wanted to show up a little bit differently. I knew there was something like a parking brake that was, inhibiting me to grow. I just didn't fully know what that was subconsciously was there. So I enlisted the help of Dr. Kevin Downing, who's B's therapist, and made that awesome recommendation. The legend. So if you're listening to this, highly recommend you look into his services. Absolute game changer. And I went through, a period of probably a month or two of biweekly calls with them, just to, discovery, kind of finding out, okay, where's the baseline, right? And we eventually got to my addiction with alcohol and was able to, kind of develop a plan. And through another story, the rock bottom lowest moment of my life, had this awakening, if you will, and decided that was the line in the sand, that alcohol was going to be no more in my life. So that was a huge win. This is December 2016, the story of that. But in any case, as Dr. Kevin was going through my childhood and kind of talking about my, the dichotomy between my mom and my dad, similar to you, Elle, I just kind of swept it under the rug. It's like, oh yeah, and by the way, like my dad, we ended up escaping him when I was 10 years old, and then we moved to Michigan, yada yada. He's like, whoa. He's like, pump the brakes on that, dude. And he's like, well, talk to me about that. And I just kind of explained the situation, just as I just did. And Dr. Kevin said, well, Bryce, I have my first action step for you, and your first action step is you're going to go ahead and reach reach out to your father. You're going to go find him and you're going to have a conversation with him.
So you had to go and find him. You had not even spoken to him, and now like
at that point, it's like close to 25 years at that point. So I'm like, wait, doctor, wait, what? Wait, I was like, let's back this away. What?
Yeah.
That was my reaction. Like I was not, either in the mood or, had visibility or able to even receive that message in the moment. Right. And I just asked some clarifying questions. I forgot exactly what he shared with me at the time. But I was like, all right, well, I am hiring you. I'm consulting you. There's some sort of issue. So, I took a white belt mentality and realized that I'm here for a reason. Sure. I'm not going to completely discredit you, but let me chew on that for a few weeks. Mm-hmm. So I did. I didn't take action initially. I didn't tell it was off the table, but I let him know in a few meetings that will follow up. And as I started to think this, and there was something that really stuck in my mind, what Dr. Kevin wanted me to do was an exercise and a good analogy and metaphor of life, of really addressing the problems in life, not running from them, but confronting them. And even though friction's challenging at the front end, usually clarity is on the other side of friction. Mm-hmm. So as I kind of put some thoughts together, I thought, wow, maybe he has something there. The additional thing that I learned in the process, and whether he showed the light initially or just a benefit of having that conversation, it showed me that just because someone treats you one way doesn't mean you actually have to reciprocate the exact same treatment. You can take the higher road. You can be a bigger man and you can learn and grow from that. Mm-hmm. And that was really, if I kind of put a bow on the experience, that was probably the biggest lesson I learned, to confront friction. Clarity is the other side of that. It's uncomfortable at first, but that's going to benefit you and your loved ones long term, right. First and foremost. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of gold to that. And the second dairy component, as I just mentioned, was the fact that you can take the higher road. It doesn't mean that you need to reciprocate the same type of treatment. So this all to say, after a few treatments later, I ended up, I was like, Dr. Kevin, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take you up on that. Mm-hmm. So what I did was, and now in the day of internet, I just went and Googled. And at that time, my mom actually had reestablished connection with my father, I want to say like 5 years before. So didn't have.
Did you already know that at that point?
High level.
No,
Mom,
okay.
I wasn't really too interested.
You're like, I don't really, that's you.
And my
I'm good.
100%.
Yeah.
My siblings the same way. I was probably the most receptive to it.
Oh, really?
Compared to my siblings.
And you're the oldest, correct?
I'm the oldest,
okay.
yeah. But, after some thought, I was like, and after hearing a little bit of feedback that my mom wasn't sure, 100% sure, but there was a little bit of custody situation and I guess financial contributions that they had to work through, 5 years before. She's like, Bryce, I think he got remarried. So I was like, okay. So when I, go through the Google kind of search, I typed in his full name and 3 search results pop up. 1, 2, and 3. They all have an additional spouse as tied to that particular name. So it's like, okay, well, there's 3 out of 3, search results that just populated. Chances are he probably got remarried. My mom was probably right.
Sure.
So I ended up calling the first, contact on Google, and dead end number wasn't the wrong number. That note phone had to be deactivated. Then I take a deep breath and then execute the second call. And after a few rings, a lady picks up. And at this point, my heart starts pounding, sure. Right? Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm probably talking to his spouse. Yeah. So I, in all the courage I could muster up, I said, hi, is, my father's name there? And it was probably only a second pause, but it felt like probably 10 minutes. Yeah. And she's like, well, who's calling? So I knew at that point that I probably had the right number, because otherwise, she wouldn't have, had that, particular, because she was kind of a little bit, you could tell she's guarded. Sure. I clearly, called the right number, but right. Why are you calling? Right. And then I just introduced myself, and I introduced, said who I was and the relationship I had, who I was looking for. And again, probably only a 2 or 3 second delay. It felt this time like a half an hour. And she says, Bryce, I thought you would never call. I am so excited to talk with you. And I was like, oh my God, the adrenaline, everything was like this weight of the world just dropped off my shoulders. So I ended up talking with her for about 5 minutes, the sweetest lady ever. It turns out she kind of gave me the background of my father. He turned out to be a truck driver. So on the weekends, he wasn't home. I think I called, on the weekends he was home, but during the week he was doing his routes in the Midwest. Ironically, he moved to the state of Michigan trying to follow my mom and trying to get my mom back, like shortly after, within a few months of that kind of crazy traumatic situation.
Sure.
My mom wouldn't take him back for a good reason. And then he ended up finding...
She wasn't there anymore. So
she wasn't there anymore, right.
Yeah.
And he ended up finding another wife living 10 miles from me for 10 years, unbeknownst to me at the time, which was just freaking wild. Wild.
Yeah.
So in any case, after connecting with her, she gave me a cell phone. And when she gave me a cell phone, I'll never forget, her last words of wisdom were kind of like in hope and almost a little bit desperation, not for me, but really for my father's. And she said, Bryce, I really hope you reach out, and I'm really praying that you connect with him. And really what that took to me is like, she probably in the feeling that I got on the back end for probably years, she was probably telling him, hey, it's probably a good idea you reach out to your kids. Now, I don't know that to be true, but human nature, we're savvy, right? That was the feeling that I got. So at that point, it gave me a little bit more, I guess, confidence and reassurance that like, okay, like I can call him and reach out to him. And turns out through a series of, follow-up text messages and whatnot, we set up an appointment to talk like the week following. It's actually a very anticlimactic conversation now, which is okay in the grand scheme of things. When I share the story previously, some people are kind of waiting for a better ending or a more climactic ending, which just didn't happen. Ended up talking with him for about 12 minutes. The first 9 or 10 minutes, I just, asked him questions about his life and kind of got like a little bit of rundown. And after listening to him, hearing him, which by the way, was interesting. I was 8 or 9 last time I saw him. And my dad was a big guy, overweight, but was probably about 6 foot, 220, 230 pounds, not like of stacked muscle, of actually like fat. But when I'm 8 and 9 years old, I'm thinking he's larger than life. Turns out he's a very kind of soft, very feminine voice, which there's nothing wrong with that. But it was just a very interesting
when
dichotomy.
You're older, it's different. Yeah.
I
when
was
you're
like,
younger, it's like, that's like Mufasa. Like you're like scared, but then you get older. Yeah, I get it.
Totally.
I get it. Yeah.
So the first few minutes, it was kind of even like disarming me, like listening to him, because the expectation was so different. But after I, just got some clarity and was inquisitive in his life, he turned to me and he said, Bryce, well, I appreciate the call. I've been, watching you from afar. I know the kind of high level moments in your highlights in your life, and for what it's worth, I think you have done a good job, and I'd be happy to stay in touch. And we left it at that. And at that moment in time, no ill will. I actually have no ill will towards him. I thought to myself, you know what? It's probably not the path that I want to go down. And I'm a firm believer that people in your life, they're either models of behavior you want to model or caution signs or cautionary tales. And while I do know in my heart of hearts, my dad's a cautionary tale of what not to do, I also think it and look from his perspective. I don't think he's a bad person. I don't think he's a terrible human being. I think he just failed to step up at the key moments in life. I think he failed to act with courage to do the things that he needed to do as a man. And that's definitely something that I will never replicate in my life. But it gave me a lot of peace in that moment. And I realized that, you know what? If anything, I feel sorry for the dude. I wish him nothing but the best. While he didn't deliver the things that I probably wanted, it actually gave me a lot of insight to the man I don't want to be. And now it's my turn to continue to develop the man that I do want to be, so I can be a model for myself, my family, my loved ones, and the people that I mentor. And that was probably the biggest takeaway I got from that. Exactly.
Would you say that you, at this point in your life, have 100% forgiven him?
I would. Are there, I take it with a caveat in the sense, are there still things that I'm working through that probably were in my childhood that I can still get better and improve on and come full circle? Yes. So I think two things would be true, but in my heart, there's no ill will, there's no animosity. I've forgiven him. And now my job is to continue to, reflect and overcome the things that potentially are still in my subconscious. I've gone such a long way, but I don't think we ever get there. Like the mountain's still tall. So I'm hesitant to say like, hey, it's a completely clean slate, because there's still more work that I can do, would be just the secondary answer there.
Right on. The other crazy part to me was, and this is another thing that you and I relate on, is when your father does something or has done something in the past, and then later on it comes back around where you might do or struggle with the same thing. For your situation, you had said that he had struggled with drinking, and then at a specific point you struggled with that as well, and then obviously got yourself out of that. My situation was my dad being the breadwinner when he was doing things illegally, right? So making a lot of money, but not clean money.
Right.
My mom's making great money being a registered nurse, but when it came time to when it's time to have me, he's like, I'm giving up that life. I'm not going to do it anymore. And so he went to get a job. He was working at Mount Sac, and so he was making like no money in comparison to what he was like, what he was making before.
Yeah.
So it was humbling for him, but he didn't like how that felt, right? Having my mom be the one who's making all the money, naturally the one who's making the more money is kind of telling you how to move and how not to move because, hey, we can't do that anymore. Don't be spending this up because they're the ones bringing it in, right? My dad, being the man, doesn't like that, right? There's pride, there's ego involved, and probably all that stuff, right? So he struggled with that, and then that led him to make a mistake that cost him 30 years of his life, and then get him, landed in prison. And so, anyways, all that to say that then fast forward years later, Betsy, my wife, we had just gotten married and struggling financially. She's in school, and also has a job. And then I'm trying to get my business off the ground, and I have a job, and we're just not making good money like that, right? We're living with my mom. I got to get out of my mom's house because I just don't want to be there. There's a bunch of drama there, but like we're just struggling and stressed. And I remember for a split second, man, like I got to be honest with you, I was literally thinking of like different ways I can get myself out of the position, and I thought of illegal things. Like I'm just like, I have to provide. I have to be able to get us a place. I have to do this. I have to do that. And then obviously didn't end up doing anything. But like the fact that I even thought about that was the first time I ever felt like I connected with my dad ever. Like I felt like, because I was so mad when I was a little kid. Like, how could you do that? You knew, that you had a family at home and you still went out and did it. You're an idiot acting dumb, right? And you threw everything away, right? You left us. But then, later on, when now I'm the man in the relationship, I have to provide for somebody, I have to protect her and things like that. For a split second, I was like, man, like I never thought I'd ever be able to like relate and say like that I could understand maybe what you're going through, but it sounds like you kind of had that and that probably served in helping you and forgiving, I'd say, right?
100%. Yeah. And interesting. Good on you for, being forthcoming with that. I think two things can be true. Number one, I would imagine a very humbling moment in your life when you kind of had that thought and you're like, holy shit, like this is what I was so angry and frustrated with my father. And now like the same thought entered my mind.
It's crazy.
Humbling, right?
Yeah.
But in this other side of the coin though, action is really the only thing that matters. So to your credit, there's a difference between thinking things because we all have like the thoughts of, fears, desires, concerns, like all sorts of stuff comes through from a conscious perspective, humanity and our mindset, but it's a different, perspective to actually take action against that. So to your credit. But for me, I mean, when I had my rock bottom moment, and it was a time where, ultimately I wasn't living an aligned life. I didn't have, an incredible amount of outside factors or legal issues or anything like that affect me. Unfortunately, my kid sister, who I love and adore, my best friend growing up, she had these issues in a working relationship. And it came to the realization that, oh my goodness, I wasn't living a life of integrity. I wasn't living in a life of alignment. It was the most painful situation to see my kid sister. So ultimately, when the last piece of friction and tension around alcohol happened between my sister and I in our business relationship, ultimately I came in and had a conversation with her, and I said, I love you. Literally, you're my best friend growing up. I've tried to do everything I can. Forever's a long time, but if we want to continue to work together for the next 12 months, I can't have you drink alcohol because I don't know when this is going to happen, or I'm going to have to, bail you out of a legal situation, or chaos is going to ensue, which is a disservice to you, to our team, our business, etc. So I said, I need you to, sign an agreement for 12 months. You're not going to drink anything alcohol wise. And then afterwards, then we can reassess the situation. And Elle, for me, kind of similar to you, to have that kind of like humbling moment when you saw yourself in your dad, or just saw your dad in you. Yeah. For me, after I had that conversation, I went home and it just felt heavy. It was a really challenging experience. It's kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts, and the tension was building, and then having to deliver that conversation after a conversation that affected my work, affected my team and my business. It was just a very heavy moment, and I ended up going to sleep. And I'll never forget this. I woke up And when I woke up, just something changed inside of me. And I remember looking at the mirror, dude, and I had a freaking deep look at the mirror. And two things came to my mind. And similar to your point about the same vision you had for your dad, I just looked in the mirror and I just saw all the chaos, all the wreckage, all the addiction that unfortunately happened to my father, which caused chaos in his life, caused chaos in my mom's life, my siblings' life. Then I also, played the tape of the stories of his father, because his father had a drug and alcohol addiction too. I saw the cycle repeating, and I thought to myself, like, when is this insanity going to end? When is the cycle of addiction going to end? And for me, that was one aspect of the breaking point, where it just got to the point of like enough. And I had that same moment, like very humbling. It's like, holy shit, if I stay on this path, I'm going to end up like my father, which I swore for years, for like decades, I was never going to become. And the second aspect at play, which really leveled up myself from a leadership lens, I realized that in that moment, our society, and I understand why, will forgive criminals more than hypocrites. And I realized at that moment in time, and maybe while all the severe things that happened to my sister, unfortunately didn't happen to me, but not to say that it couldn't have happened. And I realized, how can I expect my kid sister, who I love and adore, to do something that I'm not willing to do myself? And I just, the act of hypocrisy shone a light from that moment of looking in the mirror and seeing those two things, seeing the path of my father and seeing the path of hypocrisy that I was on, was really the lowest point that made me realize that I need to adjust course. I need to be a better man. I need to live with moral authority, meaning I need to walk my talk. And certainly it's a work in progress. Some days are better than others, but that was that moment in December 2016 that really changed my life. And I share that, bring that full circle. Number one, I think it's an incredible message for your audience, but also two, just to relate to you, that humbling experience when you see yourself in your father in this particular case, even though for years you swore yourself you weren't going to be like that. It scared the hell out of me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I can tell how impactful it was, number one, because you remember the date and probably the time and everything like that was something that, well, like your brain took a screenshot that day.
Burned
like it just saved forever. And so I can tell how impactful that was for you. I want to talk to you about when you mentioned leadership a second ago, and I want to talk about that because obviously you are a leader of so many people. Like, so many people look up to you. They learn from you. They want to emulate you. And your journey of being a leader started very early because you're the oldest of your siblings. And so I'm sure you had to kind of step up and help them in a lot of ways. Kind of how was that as far as you having to step into that role? Was it difficult for you? Was it something that your mom kind of had to talk where you say, hey, I need some more help around here? Or was it just kind of like you saw that something was missing, you wanted to just fill those shoes? Like, kind of how was that as far as your earliest days of being, a leader?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's an incredible question. I think first and foremost, taking a step back, how I define leadership is influence. If you can influence others, you're a leader. And sometimes that's good influence, sometimes that's bad influence. I was literally just in Poland, in Auschwitz, Poland, which is the biggest Nazi concentration camp, which was just horrific, if you will. But I looked at the work that Adolf Hitler did. He was a horrible, evil man. He was actually a good leader. He had a lot of influence on that. And there's something to be said and something to be learned there. So for me, I look at leadership as a skill set. It's a tool, if you will, but a tool that I have a duty, obligation, responsibility to continue to develop and use for the good. But also being a tool, a skill, it can be developed with time. Okay. So leadership, are skill sets that you can continue to acquire. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, I want to be a better leader for myself, for my family, you can. It's an acquired skill set, which is one of my messages for today. But I also think two things can still be true, that sometimes people have, more of an inherent quality or factory installed ability to be a stronger leader. And for me, the quality, the characteristics, the component that really defines whether or not someone has a factory installed, quality and characteristic is their ability to accept responsibility. Yeah. And for me, I always like seeing the chaos that happened in my house and with my mom, my poor mom. She's like the sweetest lady in the world. She was never going to go out and be a massive breadwinner and dominate a business and all that. Her vision was to be a good lady, support her kids and support her family, right? So very quickly I learned that, hey, I was going to have to step up and help my mom probably more ways than she even thought. When I remember when I was 9 or 10 years old, even though she was from Michigan, we got transplanted, she'd call me up on her way home from work before cell phones and all that and just say, hey, Bryce, can you remind me how to get home again? And I would just kind of like have to recite her the directions and all that, just kind of, taking action and taking from a leadership lens. I also felt just a deep level of responsibility for my siblings. And that came factory installed. And I share this with you because I genuinely think this is the biggest characteristic for a strong leader. Do you feel responsible? Because if you don't feel responsible for yourself or others, you're not going to really be a strong leader moving forward. But if you have that feeling of, hey, you know what? It's not all about me. Yeah. I have a responsibility to other people. You're going to be able to develop your leadership skills really quickly. And for me, I always felt that, and I think, I'm very grateful to have strong relationships, or have developed strong relationships with my siblings. Sadly, with my sister right now, because of the addiction that we both share, that relationship has been severed. The light is still, the hope is still there. Sure. It'll come back at some day. But ultimately with my brother, to this day, we're thick as thieves, from a best friend perspective, from a working relationship perspective. So to answer your question, for me, leadership is a skill. It's a skill that can be developed. But for me, it was factory installed in the sense of my feeling responsibility, which has helped me then. And it's also helped me to this present day leading an international fitness franchise. For sure.
And first off, I want to touch on that with your relationship with your sister. I'm also hopeful that you guys will have that moment that you and your dad got to have where, you guys were on the phone, you had that conversation. Hopefully it'll be in person. You guys will get to hug it out and it'll be a beautiful moment. But I think that, yeah, definitely, man. I want that for you. So on the just kind of leaning more into leadership, I also want to ask you too, because obviously the Squire Program, like this is about, helping young men become stronger men.
Yes.
And it's a lot of times the father bringing his son, but it's not always that way. Like we have a lot of boys that come out that don't have their dads. Like the mother reached out to us, or whoever their guardian is, says, hey, I have someone who I want to do this, but he doesn't have his dad. Can he still participate? And the answer is, of course, like absolutely bring him out. Like, we'd love to have him. And so that means that there's a lot of mentors that we have, as you know, that come in and, mentor these young men. You yourself have done that at the Squire Program. And so it doesn't even have to just be your own kids. Like you can be a leader and a mentor to anybody, that is willing to receive. And so for you, kind of, why are you so passionate about leadership and kind of helping people in this way? Like, because I can tell that it's something that's super important to you. Why is that?
Well, I think leadership, you have the ability to influence others in a positive way. Like I said, it's a skill, it's a tool set. It can actually be used for the bad or for the good. And I just choose good. And, factory installed, or because my mom's incredible influence on me just to be a good person, I just realized, I have something I want to offer the world. And when I, move towards the good, I feel good, I feel better, things happen. And the opposite is also true. So I think, inherently, that's why I enjoy leadership. It's a tool to really better not only the individual's life, but everyone gets better when the leader gets better.
Sure.
So, I want to start there. Secondarily, I love the Squire Program. I was fortunate, to be able to participate. And you're right, I was able to step in and mentor a young gentleman to this day who, unfortunately had a bad situation with his father and kind of, shipped away. Sure. But earlier in the conversation, you talked about, okay, were there some other feelings, or where did some of the feelings of feeling less than? Well, in our school growing up, when there was a father, type of situation, my family, my brothers and sisters are kind of like, shoot, it was just the worst moments, like the most awkward. And that whatever's on the date, on the calendar, and you're like, it's a month away, and you're just thinking, man, I'm going to show up and I'm the only one who had a dad. That's a humbling moment for sure. And I just feel a duty, obligation, responsibility to give back, to be the man that I wanted, that I needed. And similar to you, and this is why we're cut from the same cloth. And, 100%. I feel so close to you because of that foundation, and also to the men we are, and the men we're continuing to develop to be. So, for me, I have a passion for doing that. And I applaud, our audience listening. And if you're a mom, okay, that you have a son that this experience is super valuable, being the infrastructure and the fact that the Squire Program has done a lot of work to be able to recruit other awesome guys that want to give that mentorship ability, I'd highly encourage you, don't let that to be the excuse of not enrolling your son. I think there's massive value in that. And it will give your son so much confidence, and also create a strong relationship, an incredible experience. And it's also going to give, the mom an incredibly fulfilling experience, knowing that, hey, I'm not a male father figure. You're clearly doing an incredible amount of work for your son, but there's different energy involved. Right. But you're going to be in a space, and you can live with the fact and be proud of the fact that you put you set yourself up, you set your son up for an experience that's going to benefit him long term.
Exactly. It's something that he'll literally never forget.
Totally.
It's going to be so awesome. And it's cool too, because it's it's a shout out to some of the guys we work with, as far as like people like you that come in that help mentor. Is none of our like mentors are like, the only word I can think of is like corny, like these, like, because my mom when I was younger put me in, I think it was Big Brothers Big Sister, and I just didn't connect with the guy. Like, he was trying so hard to connect, it just wasn't working. I was kind of like not into the things he was trying to relate to me and whatever. And so I just think it's so cool, the people that we get to work with, the people that are in these boys' lives. Like, they're people that you look up to and like you just think are cool. Like, I want to be like him, you know. Or like some of them went through the project and you get to see how hard that is and how difficult that is. Like, oh wait, he's gonna go through the program with me now. Like, it's like cool. So
totally.
Anyways, man, I just want to give you a shout out for everything that you're doing, not just with mentoring people at Squire, mentoring people within Fit Body Bootcamp, with your siblings, with everything, man. You've been a leader from the very beginning, and you're going to be a leader until the very end. I'm really grateful for that, man. I want to thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate you being open and being willing to share some of these details, because I know it's not always easy. You know, like when I'm recalling some of these stories for myself and my personal situation, sometimes it's difficult. So I appreciate you coming on, man. It means a lot. Thank you.
My man.
Cool.
Anytime. Awesome. And the feeling's mutual. I just want to take a quick second to acknowledge you. It's just been an incredible ride the last few years to see you grow, you know, in your leadership, in your business acumen, and also in your family's leadership as well. So it's an incredible ride, and I just feel blessed to be on it with you. And of course, I appreciate the opportunity today.
I appreciate it. Thanks, man. Awesome, guys. So that's a wrap for today's interview. I really want to say thank you again to Bryce once again. Guys, if you got any value from this, if you just enjoyed this conversation we had, do us a favor, man. Like the video, share the video with somebody, drop a comment, do something, man. Don't just watch the video and just be a ninja watcher where you just watch it, but you don't freaking give it. Just give us a like, man. It's free. You know what I'm saying? It's free. So anyways, I appreciate you guys. We'll see you next time.